Welcome to Between the Lines. I'm Urszula Gacek, and my guest today is Professor Carlo Masala, one of Europe's leading defence experts and author of the best-selling book, If Russia Wins. Professor Masala, welcome to Warsaw and welcome to the programme.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with an easy question. Is Russia already at war with NATO?
Well, I would say in the Russian perception, Russia is already at war with NATO. This is what basically Putin always tells the press and his own people, that it's a fight against the West, it's a fight against NATO. Secondly, I would say Russia is waging already two parallel wars, one with kinetic means against Ukraine and one with non-kinetic means, which we used to call hybrid warfare, against most of NATO's European member states.
So when you describe the non-kinetic war, what is that? Cyber attacks, sabotage?
Well, it's what we saw in the past couple of years, where cyber attacks, sabotage, espionage, but also disinformation, trying to meddle into the internal affairs, especially elections of European NATO members. So it's a whole bunch of measures they are taken with regard to European societies.
You've said on several interviews that Europe isn't moving too slowly, but it's thinking too late. Do you think that only in terms of the political decision-making process?
Well, actually, I mean, we understood what is going on, and we are trying to prepare for what will maybe come up in the next couple of years in terms of a Russian aggression. But we're doing this in peacetime structures. So we're doing this in the structures we established during peace times, which were designed to be perfect and, which were designed mainly with a view on administrative courts and accounting officers. And these structures are very slow. So we're doing the right policy, but we're doing it far too slow. As long as we don't change the structures, as long as we don't have more speed in all the efforts to rearm Europe, to make our societies more resilient, we will be simply too slow.
Can we make up for that lost time? It sounds as if we need really deep systemic reform. We can't just use the old formats and try and adapt them to this new situation. It suggests that we really have to make some deep differences. Have we got the time?
Well, we don't have the time. That's the problem. Therefore, speed is paramount. And if you listen to European leaders who basically all says, we are not at war, but we're no longer in peacetime, then this means basically we are in a kind of pre-war situation, potential pre-war situation, which requires deep structural reform. So get rid of everything which hampers your national policies or at the European level to basically speed up processes.
Is one of the reasons why we seem to be not feeling this sense of urgency the fact that the shock value of the full scale of invasion of Ukraine now 4 years ago has diminished somewhat? I think you mentioned that shock is a wasting asset. I think that was one of your war quotes. Are we normalizing war?
I mean, first of all, I would make the difference the further away you go from Moscow, geographically speaking, the less you have this kind of threat perception and the urgency of acting. The closer you are to Moscow, the more you feel the urgency of acting. The second thing is, yes, we are normalizing war. I mean, if I look at TV programs, for instance, mainly across Europe, 3 years ago, I mean, every news started with something about Ukraine. Now you have sometimes news without even mentioning what is going on in Ukraine. So we're starting to normalize war. That's the first thing. The second thing I would say is that Putin always was hoping for waging also a kind of war of attrition against the European societies, in the sense that they get used to the war, that after 4 years they question whether all the support of Ukraine is worth.
But he must have changed tactic, because I think initially he thought it was going to be a quick action, but now is time working to his advantage?
Definitely he changed tactic. I mean, when the war started, we know already, we know nowadays that he was expecting a very quick victory. So the moment he realized that it's going to be a war of attrition, then he changed tactics. And it was also a war of attrition against our European societies. He was betting and counting on the fact that we will get basically tired of supporting Ukraine. We don't see any, decisive results. So societies are starting questioning whether it's worth to spend all the money on Ukraine, to support Ukraine, while at the same time you have in most of the European countries also debates about cutting back the welfare state. So he was betting on this kind of situation, and time is playing to his advantage. This is what we have to say and what we have to realize.
Victory for Russia. You've said Russia must not win, but this is a meaningless statement unless we define what is understood by Russian victory. And I think there might be a different perception from Moscow and from the NATO allies. For Russia, how do you think Putin could go away and say, I've won this war? What would be the minimum he would have to achieve?
I mean,
tanks in Kiev?
No, not tanks in Kiev. The minimum he would have to achieve, and he's telling us what the minimum, what the bare minimum is basically, he gets whatever he occupies right now. I mean, besides Crimea, the parts of the 4 oblasts in Ukraine he illegally annexed, and he controls up to 90%. He gets them as Russian territory, officially not recognized, but he gets them as Russian territory. He gets demilitarized, more or less demilitarized Ukraine. He gets a power transition in Ukraine where he can basically try to meddle into the internal affairs in vertical commas, the rest of Ukraine. This is a Russian victory. I mean, he started as an aggressor, and he gets rewarded. Whenever you rewarded an aggressor, this is a victory for the aggressor.
In your book, If Russia Wins, which I highly recommend, although it gives you sleepless nights when you've read it, you envisage a scenario 2 years down the line after Ukraine is effectively forced to capitulate. Was that 2 years a random period of time you chose, or was there some reason why you chose a 2-year period down the road?
No, the background against which I wrote the book was the debate we had a year and a half ago, where mainly every military intelligence service of European NATO countries came up and said, by 2029, the Russians have an army who is ready to fight a war against a NATO country if it's politically wanted. And I was thinking that why should Putin wait until everyone expects him to do something? So if I were Putin, I would do things earlier when no one is expecting.
So you actually brought the timeline forward.
Exactly, and I brought the timeline forward just to remind people that, maybe our military intelligence services are right with the assessment of 2029, but from a strategic perspective, you want to have the surprise element on your side. So you don't wait until everyone is expecting you to do something, you do it when no one is expecting you to do something.
Who is he going to test first in terms of geography?
I'm not quite sure. There are some soft underbellies of NATO. And these might be cities where there is a Russian minority living in. So this is a perfect pretext for Russia to say, their rights are oppressed, we need to protect them, and then we move in. So we have these kind of cities. We have them in Norway, we have them in Estonia, and we have them in Latvia. So therefore, I'm not quite sure where he's going to attack. Yeah, if he's going to attack.
Hopefully, if he's going to attack.
Yeah, if he's going to attack. But he needs a pretext also. He needs a pretext for the international community, and he needs a pretext for his own people. So places where Russian minorities are living or Russian-speaking people are living are the perfect pretext. So it might be somewhere in the Baltics. It might be also in Norway.
He's testing already, I think, the red lines that Europe has, but it's very difficult to pin him down because the cyber attacks, the sabotage, the disinformation, we can suspect, and intelligence could advise us where the origin of these actions is, where the brains come through this action. But of course, we can't literally, as they say in Poland, catch him with his hand in the cookie jar, so to speak. And he can always say, well, that's not me. But when we, as for example the European Union, delay and show openly that we cannot agree on, for example, seizing Russian assets that are frozen in numerous European banks. How happy is he when we do that as Europe?
I mean, you saw his reaction when basically the European Council didn't agree on giving the frozen assets to the Ukrainians and had to find another solution. I mean, the Russian press looked at that as a European defeat, which actually it was. I mean, for the Russian press, it was a German defeat because Germany was the first country who came up with the idea, basically. So he's very much happy about the disunity we show in threat perception and in reaction to the Russian threat.
Has the post-Cold War order collapsed entirely? Was this inevitable? Was it a question of time that we would find ourselves in this new reality?
I mean, the moment we speak, the post-Cold War order is collapsing. It comes under pressure. It came under pressure already because of China, because of Russia. Now it's coming under pressure also because of the Trump administration. So we are present at the destruction of the post-Cold War order. Was it inevitable? This is a counterfactual question which is hard to answer. I would say no. Or probably yes, if we would have shown much more strength and determination after 2014, when basically Russia illegally annexed Crimea and started the war in the Donbass, probably we could have prevented certain things. But we didn't actually build up enough deterrence for Russia. Our signaling was extremely weak and even counterproductive. I mean, look what happened after the illegal annexation of Crimea. Nord Stream 2 was signed as a project. This is not something where you deter people, where you deter a country. This is where you encourage. I mean, it's the same thing like, right now is happening. You encourage an aggressor. He gets away with certain things. And therefore, of course, in his mindset, he can continue with the aggression. So, yeah, there was probably a window of opportunity.
It was quite a big window. We had, 8 years?
I would even go back to 2013 when Obama didn't enforce the red line in Syria.
Yes.
This was a chance for Russia to basically get into Syria, to perceive the West, the US, as weak, not determined, to basically put its money where its mouth is. And thereby, we had certain occasions where we could have prevented probably what happened then in 2022.
You mentioned President Trump and the new administration, a year into this current second term of Trump. How damaging is Washington's unpredictability?
Well, the problem is, unpredictability per se is not a bad thing, but if you're unpredictable vis-a-vis your adversaries and your partners, then it becomes a really problematic thing. The unpredictability of the Trump administration with regard to its own role in Europe, with regard to the policy as a European security provider, this is damaging with regard to deterring Russia from a potential future aggression after the war against Ukraine will end.
Can you imagine a NATO without full US commitment?
I don't think the question is whether I can imagine it or not. We have to get used to this kind of NATO. Because this is what basically the US already told us back in February last year, when Pete Hegseth came the first time to Brussels to meet a counterpart and said in his opening statement, don't expect us to be the primary security guarantor in conventional terms for Europe. This was the start of the whole debate we're in right now. If you look at the National Defense Review, which is about to be published probably in a couple of days or weeks from now, and the rumors you get from Washington, it's very clear that Europe doesn't play any longer an important role in the US force posture. And if you look at the national security strategy, I mean, there is written that that the Europeans do consider Russia as a threat to them, but not the US.
So can you imagine a kind of revamped NATO or a completely new alliance?
Well, I think I wouldn't give up the structures we have in NATO.
They're immense.
Yeah, the question is, are the Europeans able and willing, and able means militarily, politically, but also financially, to fill the gap the US will leave? in NATO? This is the core question, because usually people look at NATO as this kind of political alliance, but even as important is the whole integration of the integrated military command structure. And this was where the US basically over the past 70 years managed the way NATO forces were working together, standardization, interoperability, and all this stuff. So the question is, are we able to fill this gap? And this is a political question, but I don't see right now any European country or a coalition of European countries really to think hard about this.
In your book, you envisage a situation where Russia actually takes a part of Estonia, a small town on the border of Estonia, and hoists the Russian flag up the mast, I think, of the town hall. At the beginning of our interview, you mentioned that the further NATO members are from the front line.
Yeah.
The more complacent they are possibly about this situation. And we're meeting today here in Warsaw. If you were Poland's Minister of Defence, how would you convince those who are further west and further south of us that they have an important role to play, even if they're not a frontline state?
I think we should put the fact much more in the forefront that Russia is waging this kind of hybrid war against our democracies with the aim of undermining our democracies. And they're pretty much successful in doing this. This information, how many people still do believe in parts of Europe, that the whole Ukrainian thing was because of NATO, that, the Ukrainians are a Nazi state and so on and so forth. We should we should work basically on the basis that Russia is also trying to destabilize our democratic societies, and people need to be aware that democracy in our society is at risk. And I think this is the argument you can put forward with regard to those countries who are far away, let's say, from the front lines and don't have this kind of threat perception for Russia, with regard to Russia as a kind of military threat to the European security landscape.
So let's take a country that's not so far from the front line, but not on the front line, Germany.
Yeah.
Germany, in terms of GDP per capita, spending per capita as GDP, one of the 2% below even a NATO average. Poland has the leading position there, 4.7%, I think, last year. Back in 2012, Minister Sikorski was in Berlin, and he made a very famous statement. This was actually in reference to the Eurozone crisis at the time, but he said, "I fear German power less than I am beginning to fear German inactivity." Now, I don't know whether we can transpose that in today's situation. Do you still see Germany as hesitant to really get involved, to step up that spending? Is the mood changing in Germany?
The mood is changing, and the new German government basically provided all the financial measures to rearm the German Bundeswehr. I mean, we took defense out of the debt brake. That means we can, theoretically speaking, spend indefinitely on defense. Huge procurement things are going on right now in Germany. Where the German elite, the political elite, but also public opinion has to get used to is that with this kind of policy, of course, there is also a kind of mental change required, that Germany should try to lead Europe also in a military way. Because we see it. And, if you look at the economy, whenever Germany is reluctant, half of Europe hides behind their back. Mm-hmm. Whenever Germany leads, half of Europe goes along. Mm-hmm. And this we have to translate also in the military realm. And there we are not yet there. I see the first signs, but we are not yet there. We are still, because of our history, because of our security culture, we're still a bit, for me, too reluctant to have this kind of leading role. And wherever I go in Europe, countries are asking for a more active German role in military affairs. So we should basically...
So that quote of Sikorski still sounds good.
Exactly.
Maybe as we wrap up, a personal question. Is there another book in the pipeline, Professor?
There is another book in the pipeline which is about the frontiers of the new world order. And it's not meant only the military frontiers, but also the economic frontiers and the political frontiers.
So hopefully you won't be a modern-day Cassandra who is doomed not to be believed.
I hope not.
Professor Masala, thank you very much for joining me here today in Warsaw. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you.